morning, good afternoon, good evening. Yesterday on this platform, I had Professor Lumumba talking about the three groups of individuals one can find in a society: the idiots, the tribesmen, and the citizen. I thought I would do a follow-up. In this one, Professor Lumumba is going to talk about the consequences of those who have failed to rise above the mentality of the idiot and the tribesmen. I think what he's saying here, although he doesn't say Zimbabwe, but he might just as well have said Zimbabwe, because that is Zimbabwe. That is what we are experiencing in Zimbabwe.
In many African countries, the ballot does not make sense because it produces individuals that you cannot recognize. Yet, we have elected them and we are stuck with them. And once we are stuck with them, they do the wrong things and we suffer the consequences. And then we start complaining again the day after the election. And then when an election comes again, then we elect them because we are idiots and tribalists. Then another election comes and then we elect them and we complain again. Then in many African countries now we begin to pray and fast, waiting for God to come and salvage ourselves from ourselves.
Well, what he's saying is true. It's a familiar path that many Zimbabweans have traveled these last 44 years of rigged elections. The last 24 of which we've had added responsibility of electing the opposition, supposedly, for them to implement the democratic reforms to stop the ZANU-PF rigging the elections. But as we saw last year, the ZANU-PF blatantly rigged those elections, showing that the 24 years of risking all to elect the opposition, MDC/CCC, have been a waste of time. But like Professor Lumumba is saying there, we've continued to elect the same opposition leaders. Last year, Chamisa promised that CCC was going to win big because he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. And we believed him. 2 million Zimbabweans went out to vote, convinced that Chamisa had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. The day after the election, the same 2 million were complaining that the elections were rigged. Never occurred to them that they had believed that Chamisa had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. What is actually even worse is that as much as they believe the elections were rigged, they do not want to believe that Chamisa lied to them. Towards the end there, Professor Lumumba was talking of how some people have started praying and fasting for deliverance from the Lord. Well, Chamisa said has pulled the first one on that because he is convincing his followers. He convinced his followers to participate in last year's elections promising that he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. Hashtag God is in it. And the followers believed it. One only wonders whether Chamisa's God is the same God that the 2 million are praying to and fasting for deliverance. We cannot say we don't know what is happening. It is not rocket science to say that elections in Zimbabwe are rigged. In this day and age, everyone should know, at least have an idea of what constitutes free, fair, and credible elections. The purpose of having rules is that it clears this is the way we are going to do it. And if those in power, in this case, yes, NOPF, decide that they're not going to follow the rules, then we have got to come up with what are we going to do about it. And in this particular case, the solution was we get the opposition who, once they get into power, they implement reforms to stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections. Then the question is, why is the opposition for the last 24 years failed to implement even one reform? The people themselves should ask that question. The fact that the people themselves don't seem to be even aware why they've been voting for the opposition beggars belief. They still maintain risking all to follow the likes of Chamisa. What can one say? You get what you deserve. Zimbabweans have to learn that when the country gained its independence in 1990, we were to be masters of our own destiny. Whether we were ready for it or not, it's irrelevant. We have had the last 44 years to learn what constitutes free, fair, and credible elections, and to make sure that we have free, fair, and credible elections. We become masters of our own destiny. But for some reason, we never seem to learn. How it is possible that anyone could be so easily conned into believing that Chamisa had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes to stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections beggars belief. And yet 2 million believed him. And 3 to 4 million others in the diaspora particularly believed him too. They didn't have a chance to vote, but they nonetheless believed him, and they cheered and applauded the elections. Some of them even bankrolled that election, because they believed what Chamisa said. And what is shocking is the same people now do not even have the guts to admit that they made a mistake. How naive is that? Unbelievable. The issue of stopping ZANU-PF rigging the elections is not rocket science. People have got to realize that at the present moment, as long as ZANU-PF has carte blanche powers to rig the elections, they will do so. The opportunity to implement reforms, we had it in 2008 to 2013. And Chamisa and company, the MDC-CCC, wasted it. What is the way forward? Well, the way forward is very simple. We cannot get ZANU-PF to implement any meaningful reforms between now and 2028. I think it is naive to think the CCC MPs and senators have even an interest in getting any reforms implemented. So they will not get any reforms. But let me assure you, they are gearing already to participate in 2028 for the sake of greed. They will participate in 2028. Chamisa himself is relaunching his blue bus and will come up with yet another idiotic promise of how he will win the elections without reforms. We should have the common sense to realize that as long as we participate in our millions, SADC, the AU, will not do anything about it. SADC and the AU condemned last year's elections as flawed and illegal, but they did not deny ZANU-PF political legitimacy because Zimbabweans had participated in those flawed elections in their millions. You participate again, SADC will do nothing about it. The argument that we must keep on participating in a flawed election only comes from somebody who has absolutely no clue what they're talking about. Who doesn't want to think. What is the point of coming up with the rules if you're going to allow ZANU-PF to break the rules with no consequences? At the present moment, there's nothing we can do to stop ZANU-PF going ahead with 2028 elections. But at least we can stop participating and saying so loudly and clearly now, not wait until 2 months before the election. No, denounce them now and make it very clear that we are not going to participate. But everyone knows that Chamisa has got only to come up and make another one of his idiotic promise. And everyone will believe this time we're going to win them. And they will participate in their millions. Well, the consequence of that is that SADC and the AU will do nothing about it. And will continue to suffer. At the beginning, like I said, of this discussion, I mentioned that there are 3 distinct groups of people in every society, not just Africa, everywhere. They are the idiots, the tribesmen, and the citizen. I think in Zimbabwe we have allowed the idiots and the tribesmen to have the final say in defining the country's destiny. It is high time that the few citizens that are there, out there, really take up the challenge and have a meaningful say in defining the country's destiny. We can stop ZANU-PF rigging the 2028 elections. We cannot stop that. But what we can do is make sure that they do not get away with it. And the only sure way of making sure they don't get away with another rigged election is making sure that people do not participate in those flawed elections. We have got 2 million Zimbabweans, the Chamisa Chete Brigade, as I call it, who will participate in 2028 elections without reform, only to complain afterwards that the elections were rigged. Our task is to make sure that those people do not participate. Easier said than done, but it can be done. Thank you very much for listening. Have a good day.